Hi, I'm Katharine Allen from InterpreTAmerica, and this is InterpreTIPS, where we answer your questions about the interpreting profession. Today's question comes from a manager of interpreting services in a healthcare setting in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and she asks, I'd like to know how to appropriately interact with providers who insist on using family members as interpreters. It's against our organization's policies, and also providers who make comments like, the patient doesn't need an interpreter. They speak perfect English. Do you have any tips on how interpreters can respond in an effective, judgmental, and non-confrontational manner? Of course, the challenge here is working with providers who really aren't fully informed about the best way to communicate with their patients who do not speak English well enough to navigate a healthcare interaction. To solve this problem, let's first consider what's going on, and then look at some solutions. The truth is, providers are under a lot of pressure to get through their patient exams as quickly as possible. And healthcare systems aren't really very flexible when it comes to making patients and providers wait for the interpreter to arrive before they start to give care. So as a result, it's very tempting to just go ahead if it seems the patient does speak enough English, or if there is a fluent family member who can interpret instead. Well, to overcome this situation, solutions really are needed in two areas. So first, the most effective way to encourage providers to work with the professional interpreters they actually have available is to educate them about why it's so important. This requires resources and a very real commitment from the healthcare institution itself. But providers receive constant training on protocols for topics such as patient safety and infection prevention. And they also need training on how to best communicate with limited English-speaking patients and their families to help support the best possible health outcome. This training should include both legal requirements and, high patient care standards. Okay, now some of you are shaking your head and rolling your eyes, and you're thinking, oh yeah, but she has no idea how hard it is to actually do that in my organization. But I do know it can be very hard. That doesn't change the reality that a critical role interpreting services departments play is to create and implement precisely this kind of training. The second area is how an interpreter can respond directly. Now, for this, you need to have scripts that you've prepared ahead of time, so you have a professional response ready when you're challenged by a provider. For example, if the provider insists the patient speaks enough English and doesn't need an interpreter, you might say, it's wonderful to speak about non-critical medical issues directly in English with the patients, I know. However, during the intake process, this patient was screened for language preference, and he indicated he wanted to discuss his medical condition in his native language. Or you can say, this patient has indicated she doesn't understand English well enough to talk about medical information, and our hospital policy requires that a trained interpreter be present. Or a third option would be to say, I'm here to make sure that everything you need to say to the patient about her medical condition is communicated fully and accurately. Now, if a patient or provider insists on having a family member interpret, the best solution is for the hospital to have a policy that requires that an interpreter be present anyway, who can observe and jump in if it seems clear that the patient's family member really isn't doing an adequate job. If you can't resolve the issue with the provider, please don't escalate the confrontation. Just do the very best you can during the session, and then consider making what we call a critical incident report afterwards. Go to the appropriate supervisor inside the hospital or with the language service company that sent you, report what's going on, and then ask them to give you the protocol they want you to follow when a provider refuses your interpreting services. So remember, really the true solution is to educate your providers and your organization about the key role professional interpreters play so that the whole workplace has buy-in. I hope these suggestions are helpful. We'd love to hear about the strategies that have worked best for you. Otherwise, that's it for now. I'll see you soon for the next InterpreTIPS.